NBA star player for the Cleveland Cavaliers, who sported the number 43 in honor of his favorite NASCAR driver, Richard Petty. He's been a race fan since he was a kid and later became a team owner in what is now the Xfinity Series, and today co-owns JTG Daugherty Racing and Cup. Brad Daugherty goes off track to talk about his passion for racing, his contributions to the NASCAR Drive for Diversity program, and his thoughts on NASCAR's ban of the Confederate flag and what it means for new opportunities and race fans moving forward. Well, it's been about 5 years since we last worked together at the other network. Brad Daugherty, thank you so much for being on. There's so many things that we can talk about. So I just thought, let's get you on and just talk about things.
Oh, Jamie, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a while since we had an opportunity to work together. It was a lot of fun working with you. You're so dedicated. You get after it. Very admirable being around you because you absolutely go get it. So it's good to see you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. I'll just, first off, I want to ask how Santa Barbara is, because I know when we were working together, you were kind of toying with the idea of moving to Santa Barbara, and now you're there taking in all that sunshine. How is life, and what are you up to these days?
Yeah, I moved back to Santa Barbara. I'm here most of the time. Probably it's been about 5 years ago when we finished our run there doing the pre-race shows and all that stuff. And it's been great. I spend most of the summertime out in Santa Barbara where it's a little bit cooler. And then I work my way back towards the East Coast when it cools off a little bit. But I've been pretty busy. We've really worked hard with our race business. Tad, Jody Gashecter, and myself, we really grind it out trying to create some opportunities for our race team, for our business, and all of our marketing products that we do. And it's been fun. So life's good. My daughter, I just had my first grandchild, and she's actually here in San Diego. So I'm spending more time here on the West Coast because I got a little 10-pound, 23-inch long grandson that I just can't get enough of. So life's good.
Dang, that is a big baby. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, he's a big boy. I love it. I just can't. I'm eat up with him.
So it sounds like you're staying busy. Do you miss the TV world at all?
Actually I do. I didn't think I would, and this season I went back and actually did some NBA games on Fox Regional in Cleveland. Had a great time doing that. But I miss doing the racing. I don't miss the Thursday to Sunday chunk of time it takes to do these shows that you do every week. People have no idea the grind of getting back and forth and in and out of these racetracks. So, it's kind of great right now because you can go to the racetrack and kind of get in and you just kind of get out. So I kind of wish we could do some TV now because it's easy in, easy out. But yeah, I do miss doing the race shows. We had so much fun. We had a really talented group of people back when we did our shows, worked really, really hard. And but I got my fix. I did about 10, 12 NBA games this past winter. Had a great time doing that. And, it's just fun. It's fun to watch the NBA game change. It's fun to watch the NASCAR world evolve. So, I've got just enough to do to keep me just busy enough to keep me out of trouble.
You just mentioned those different worlds that you have had going on. And I've always been curious. I don't think I ever knew, Brad, when the contract came back for NASCAR to ESPN back in 2006, you joined that roster of the crew. Was that something you always wanted to do, was be an analyst for NASCAR? Or is this something that was presented and you thought, heck, let's do it. I love NASCAR.
Oh, this is great. So what happened with this, I was kind of just doing my thing, had my race teams. We're busting our butts trying to get better. And I was actually, ESPN had talked to me about doing some college and pro basketball at the same time. So I was talking with John Skipper, who was the then president of ESPN. He said, you've got a pretty vast background in racing. And he said, why don't you consider doing some of the TV coverage for racing? We're going to get the TV package back and we'd love to have you be a part of it. And I was like, well, I think it would be fun to kind of give my perspective on racing because I come at it from a totally different angle than a lot of people. And so I agreed to do that. And I didn't realize we were going to work as hard as we did. And it was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed working, like I said, with everyone there. And it was not something, though, that I had ever thought about or really wanted to do. It just was presented to me by John Skipper. And I said, yeah, I'll take a shot at it. And 8 years later, we were still grinding at it pretty hard. So it was great. And it gave me great perspective because, from the ownership side of being in the sport, we look at things, so, intuitively. Everything's really myopic. It's right in front of you. And you're really worried about your own space all the time. And when I got into the broadcast side of it, you're trying to look at the total perspective of the sport and give the fan a little bit of insight into some areas that maybe they don't get to see or get to talk about on a consistent basis and give them some nuggets. So it taught me a lot about, how to look at my race business, how to take my race business and make it better in a lot of aspects. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, and I do miss it.
I know working with you, so many people would have the question, how does this number one draft pick, he goes and plays for the Cavs, an incredible career there, you retire, but you love NASCAR. So how did that all start, Brad? When did you find out about NASCAR and decide that you really loved it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I still get asked that today. And ironically, I go back to NASCAR all the way back to 1980. I grew up in a little town in western North Carolina, Black Mountain, North Carolina. And one of my best friends growing up was a young man named Robert Presley. And so Robert and I played a lot of basketball together. Robert was actually a really good athlete. But what Robert had to do in most evenings was work on his dad's race car. His father was an iconic short track racer throughout North Carolina. He won, they say, somewhere near 700 short track races. And so we would play basketball and do these things. And then later in the day, he'd be like, I got to work on a race car. And I'm like, what do you mean I work on a race car? So he took me along with him. And so I ended up working on race cars. I mean, he's like, all right, we got to get a cherry picker. We got to pull a motor and transmission apart. This is how you do it. And I mean, I was an athlete. I was always coming home with these busted fingers and my hands all chewed up, but I loved it. And so that kind of got me started. My dad was a huge race fan. Living in the little town we lived in Black Mountain, you didn't have privy to pro sports. So my dad's favorite baseball team, for instance, was the Atlanta Braves, and so our favorite thing to do, because we had a racetrack in our neighboring hometown of Asheville, the little Asheville Speedway, was to get the paper and read about what happened at the races. And what was really ironic about that, my dad loved watching and keeping up with Richard Petty and David Pearson and all these people. But right in my hometown, I could go to the store and I would see Jack Ingram. And he was legendary in the short track and old Sportsman Series world. And I could talk to him, and my dad could talk to him. And this was unbelievable. I could actually have conversation with Bosco Lowe and Jack Ingram and Bob Presley and all these legendary short track racers and read about them in the newspaper. So that kind of also just helped stoke that interest. Going forward, though, Robert and I decided we were going to build some late model stock race cars and try to go and race at our local racetrack. And we did. We built some horrible race cars. And we showed up, and these things had fender fatigue. They were bad. But we would go out, and we actually got into the races because, it was kind of, you needed the field count. So we started racing, and it just seemed natural to me. I mean, I played basketball, played baseball, and on the weekends we built race cars, and it's just what all guys did. That evolved into, when I got to the NBA my first year and finally had a little bit of money, I didn't buy a big house. I didn't buy a whole bunch of stuff. I bought a Busch Grand National Series race car, which is the Xfinity Series today. And I put Robert in a race car. We built two race cars. Banjo Matthews built us two race cars. A gentleman named Mike Fryer, who's just recently passed away, built us two. They were V6 engines back in the day. And this is the late 80s. And we go to our first race to try to qualify, which was Bristol. And Robert we had been racing late model stock stuff and done really well. Robert had eventually gotten where he was really good, won a bunch of races. We go to Bristol. I never will forget this. And we didn't have a sponsor. I was a sponsor. So we put Brad Daugherty basketball camp on the car. It was an old Buick, and again, not very good looking, but Banjo built the chassis. We hung the body, and it was square, and had some bad angles to it. But we qualified and ended up finishing like 14th. And it was unbelievable. And people kind of took notice. They're like, who are these hillbillies that show up with this horrible race car, and actually got into the field and ran pretty decently? Well, lo and behold, we go throughout that season, Jamie. We get to Orange County. We used to run a little racetrack called up in Rougemont, North Carolina, called Orange County, little 3/8 mile racetrack. And we go, and Robert had gotten better. We'd run like 4 or 5 races, something like that. That's all we really could afford, because Robert was really rough, and he tore up a lot of race cars, so we were always working on race cars. We get to Rougemont. We qualified like 8th that day. And, I mean, we're racing against Jimmy Hensley and Chuck Bound and all these guys. And I never will forget, we get through the night, and we're racing along, and we're staying in the top 10. And we get down to the last 15 laps, and I'm on the headset with Robert. And it's funny, we would do pit stops, and sometimes I would gas the car. People have no idea about this stuff.
No way.
I'm out there. We had blue jeans on and a polo shirt and a baseball cap, and I'm going over the wall. I got this gas can. I'm slamming it, and there's gas flying everywhere. And it was crazy because people saw me doing this. There's guys who write today who saw me 20 years ago doing this, but they never said anything about it. So now I get asked every day. Anyway, we're cruising along. We're racing along, and we get to the last 10 laps, and we're running like 9th. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, we're going to finish in the top 10. They had a restart after a caution, and Robert immediately gets to 5th. We get to 5th, and there's 5 laps to go, and he's racing Jimmy Spencer, who Jimmy is, as tough as an anvil. And, I mean, they are going at it. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. So we're racing Jimmy Spencer and Chuck Bound, and I'm sitting here, and I'm like, we're going to finish in the top 5. Well, Robert gets Jimmy sideways, right? He gets up to Chuck Bound. He gets into Chuck Bound, and lo and behold, we're running second with 2 laps to go. Robert roughs up the leader, and we end up winning the race. So I'm the first rookie owner with a rookie driver to win in the Xfinity Series. And then the rest was kind of history after that.
Oh, my gosh. That is incredible. So, you can tell the passion, too, as you talk about it, reliving that memory and how much fun it was back then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so then I go from that, and we raced for several more years. Robert and I won like 8 or 9 races in the Xfinity Series. He had a chance to move on when Harry Gant retired, and he got into the Skull Bandit car with Andy Petrie as a crew chief. Andy actually owned the team at the time. And so then I went from that. I get a call 2 years later from Dennis Huth with NASCAR, and he says, look, we're going to start this series. It'd be perfect for you, because I had retired. Well, I had retired. I was still playing basketball in Cleveland, but I was getting towards the end of my career, and I had gotten into the car business. I was a car dealer in Cleveland. And he said, we're going to start a series called the Truck Series. And he said, it's a new up-and-coming thing. You need to come check out one of these trucks. It would be great for your business, And I'm thinking about it. I'm like, So I had a partner, Jim Herrick. We started talking about it. I said, this would be a lot of fun. We need to try this. He says, well, let's watch it for a year and see if it survives, and then maybe we give it a shot. So that's what we did. We watched that series for a year, and then we decided we were going to get in the Truck Series. So we started looking around. We were a Ford dealership. We spoke to Ford. They got behind us. I built a relationship with Robert Yates. He said that he would build our engines for us. We had to find a driver, Jamie. So I'm like, how in the world do we get a driver? So there was a guy named Tim Stevens. Tim was a basketball manager at DePaul, and he was working for us at the car dealership. And I knew him. I mean, he was an excellent guy, and he recognized talented people really well. So I said, Tim, I need you to find me a driver for this truck. And he's like, truck? What are you talking about? I said, well, there's a Truck Series. It's just like the Xfinity Series now. I said, it's going to be awesome. We're going to get in this thing and have some fun. I said, you got to go find us a driver, though. He said, okay. I said, here's a budget. Go find 5 guys that we could pick from and drive our truck. He's like, okay. He goes out. Like a month later, he comes back. He's got a list of guys. He's found a guy in the Northwest, really talented, a little rough around the edges. His name was Greg Biffle.
Oh, wow.
He found a guy. Oh yeah, he found a guy running in Bakersville, California. Really, really talented guy. His name was Kevin Harvick.
Wow.
He found a guy running in Indianapolis who is actually, we were going to talk to the guy's dad. His dad was Kenny Irwin Sr., and the son was Kenny Irwin Jr. So that's the 4 guys he brought me to call. So we started calling all these guys. So we talked to Biffle, talked to Harvick. We talked, and we really liked Kenny Irwin Jr. because then they were running the old Thursday Night Thunder stuff on TV, and we could watch his dad race. We got to watch him race a little bit. So we're like, you know what? Let's go see if this kid will give us a shot. So we went up and talked to Kenny. Me and Jim Hemrick went and sat down and talked to Kenny Irwin. He's like, he was real coy about it. He's like, well, he said, why don't you guys run for a little while? Let's see how you do. And then maybe I'll talk to you as we get halfway through the season because I'm going to run some Silver Crown stuff and I'm kind of full. All right. So we run Butch Miller for half the year. Butch does a great job for us. And we get Kenny to come down halfway through the season just to test the truck. We had a test day at Richmond. That's back when we could test. And so we go to Richmond, and he goes out in the truck, and 5 laps. He runs 5 laps. He comes back in. Doug Rickert was my crew chief, and he said, Doug, I need you to give me just a little more bite. He says, this thing's really good. We put a little bit more wedge in the truck. He goes out. He breaks the track record for an Xfinity Series car at the time in the truck.
What?
Yes. He comes back in. He said, I want to drive this truck. So 2 weeks later, we race at Richmond. We come back with Kenny. He sits on the pole, which blew everyone away. He ended up finishing like 5th. We had a flat tire late to go. Then he signs on with us. The next year, he runs the full season for us in the 98 truck. We win 2 races. Win at Texas. We win at Homestead with Kenny in his rookie year. I'm at the NASCAR awards banquet with some friends, and that was the year I think Dale Jarrett wins the championship. So I'm standing there talking to DJ. And, we're always talking golf and all this stuff and basketball. DJ's a big North Carolina basketball fan. So I'm standing there talking to DJ, and we're chit-chatting, and Robert Yates walks over, and God bless his soul. He was a great guy. He's always real quiet. So Robert walks over, and he starts talking. He's like, man, that guy, Kenny Irwin's pretty talented. Like, yeah, he's really, really talented. He's like, what do you think he's doing a cup car? I said, I think he's going to be talented and no matter what. I said, and if you're asking, can you have him as a driver? The answer is yes. He started laughing. And so then Kenny went on and unfortunately lost his life at New Hampshire a few years later. But then we go back and we got to find a driver. So we start looking around, and that kid, Kevin Harvick, we give Kevin Harvick a call. Say, Kevin, man, you want to drive our truck? And he's like, yeah, your truck's fast. He's like, I'm actually moving up to sleep on a guy's couch. And we're like, well, where are you? He says, there's a guy, Ron Hornaday. He's a buddy. They're like, oh yeah, we know Ron. He said, I'm gonna stay at his place, and I'd love to drive your truck. So we got Kevin in that truck, and he ran great. I mean, we had like 9 second-place finishes with Kevin. Didn't win, but we were kind of just figuring it out as we went. And same thing. I'm at the awards banquet. I'm standing there talking to somebody, and here comes Childress. Richard walks over. Hey, Big Brad. I say, hey, Rich, how you doing? He's like, man, please. So this is how he starts it out. I went to school with a guy named Wayne Simonovich, and he raises the Schutzen Shepherds, the protection dogs.
Oh, yeah.
And I had one, a great dog. And so Childress comes up to me, and I'm an outdoorsy guy. I like to hunt and fish. And he comes up and he says, hey, he said, that dog you got, he said, I talked to Wayne. He said, I'm thinking about getting a couple. And I got to convince my wife that, we can live with the fur. And so we're chit-chatting, and I'm talking to him. And he's like, well, I'm going to give you a call, and maybe we can come see your dog, because he wasn't too far from me. He's up in Welcome, and I was over in Asheville. And he said, you can kind of show me how the dog works. I said, okay. Well, he walks away, and he stops. It was kind of like a Columbo moment. He turns around. He said, hey, that guy driving your truck, Kevin, that Harvick kid, he said, what kind of character is he? I said, he's good character. He's really, really talented. He said, how do you think he would do in a Busch car, which is the Xfinity Series now? I said, oh, he'd do really well. I said, and if you're asking, yes, you can have him if you want him to come drive your Busch Series car, because he's really, really good. And lo and behold, he moved on, and we moved on, and Kevin obviously has had this incredible career, and we raced for several more years, and then after that, I got out of it for a couple of years. Came along, Tad Geschecter, Robert Presley was driving a Busch Series car. I keep saying Busch Series, Xfinity Series car for Tad Geschecter. He introduced me to Tad. That's been over a decade ago, and after that, we went cup racing, and so here we are.
Dang, I didn't realize that your story of team ownership went so deep and that you guys actually kind of helped develop Kevin Harvick. Like, that's a great story.
Yeah. Oh, I take full credit for Harvick's success. I tell him all the time. And I'm going to tell you, he's a unique athlete. Kevin's a heck of an athlete. He wrestled in high school. He really understands the physical side of it as well as the mental side of competing. And I always say this, you look at Kyle Busch. Kyle is uber talented. Probably one of the most talented, maybe the most talented guy we've seen drive a race car ever. But I put Kevin Harvick right up there with Kyle, not in talent, but in work ethic and being prepared. And overall, I don't think Kevin has the talent, the raw talent that Kyle has, but I think he's just as good because of his preparation and the mental fortitude that Kevin has. Puts him in that rarefied air. So really proud of him, what he's accomplished. And it's fun racing against him. We try to kick his butt when we can, but he's hard to beat.
Still, he just keeps knocking him up. Like you said, the mental ability that he has. And he's always trying to better himself. So I love watching him. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing him win for years to come.
No doubt about it. I talk to him all the time, and he's always giving me advice for my drivers. He's like, this guy, he needs to do this. Tell him to do that. He told me, this has got to be like 6 years ago. I was talking to Harvick. We were chit-chatting about something. He said, look, there's a kid. He said, you need to sign this kid. I'm like, who? He's like, I went and did a test with Dave Blaney, and his kid was there, and he got in a race car and ran about 100 laps. He's like, I'm telling you, he's legit. I'm like, I'm not signing some kid just out of the blue because you went and ran a test with. Oh, man, I told Ryan that. I said, Harvick told me I should have signed you 5 years ago, and I didn't listen to him. So I listen to Harvick a little bit now. He helps us. So.
How much cheaper he would have been back then, right?
Oh, man, exactly.
Okay, Brad. So I love all these stories, but still, the big question is the 43. How did you pick Richard Petty as your favorite and carrying that number on in your personal career?
Yeah, that's a whole other segment I skipped over. So my dad, huge Richard Petty fan. My dad loved Richard Petty. He loved David Pearson. Obviously, pulled for Wendell Scott. We always pulled for Mr. Scott, but he loved Richard Petty. And so as time went on, I was at North Wilkesboro and watching a race, and Richard Petty walks out of the bathroom. And I was never a little kid, but I was a young guy just standing there, and I was like, I waved through the fence, and I'm like, hey, Mr. Petty. And he stops, and Richard walks over to me, and he starts talking to me. And I'm looking around, he's talking, he's like, oh, man, you're a race fan? Like, yes, sir, a big race fan. He's like, where are you from? I said, I'm from Black Mountain. He's like, yeah, we race up at Asheville, old Asheville-Weaverville Speedway, and blah, blah, blah. And we chatted. It seemed like an hour, but it was probably about 2 minutes. He was getting ready to go race. And here I was, just this kid standing here, at the racetrack, and that was my dad's hero. So I just wanted to say, hey, and the guy ended up talking to me for 3 or 4 minutes. And so that kind of fostered this admiration that took it from being my dad's hero to being my hero. And so throughout the years, whenever I started going to the racetrack more, I'd always make a habit to go and visit with Richard. And so as I became more and more involved, the first thing I'd do when I got to the racetrack is I'd go find Richard, and we'd sit on his bus and just talk. And he loves basketball. It was funny. He's always trying to tell me about basketball, what I should be doing, and about the game. He didn't know what he's talking about, but he swore up and down he knew basketball like the back of his hand. And he loved the ACC, and so we would talk about games in college. It was just great talking to him. And, he gave so much energy back, to people like me, but to the fans. And so I watched him, and I always said to myself, if I ever became famous, or even infamous, I was going to always take time and to speak to people, because you just never know who you're talking to. And I got that from Richard Petty. And lo and behold, I've met some of the most interesting people in the world
just by taking that extra 5 minutes instead of saying, man, I don't feel like it, I'm busy, I'm in a hurry. All right, just saying, okay, I'm going to give this person 5 minutes because they're giving me their full attention. You meet the most remarkable people in the world. So anyway, Richard became my lifelong hero. And as I went through college or high school and college and pros, I always tried to wear that 43. I didn't get it in college because my roommate wore 43 and we had to flip a coin. And so I wore 42. And I told Kyle, I didn't wear that because of you. I wore it because I couldn't get 43 in your day. So anyway, Richard's my hero.
That is so cool. And I would think in the NBA, I don't know how many of the competitors or your teammates were race fans or knew anything about NASCAR, but what was the reaction when people learned why you wore the 43 and who it represented?
No, people thought I was nuts. And no, there's guys would always ask me, why are you so into these race cars? What's wrong with you? And, your hero's not Dr. J or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Your hero's Richard Petty. That makes no sense. And I would just tell them, it's a cultural thing for me. And it really was the way where I grew up, my friends I grew up with, they all raced, their families raced, and I just was in the middle of that. So I grew up in the state of North Carolina, which racing and college basketball are basically our state bird symbol. So, and I've always forever tried to explain to my NBA buddies, I said, man, who doesn't love race cars going 200 miles an hour, 6 inches apart? I don't care what background you're from. Who doesn't love that? And if I can whenever I get the guys to come to the racetrack, they're blown away. They're blown away. So hopefully I'll keep trying to beat on that drum and keep making some change, and hopefully we'll see more guys come and embrace our sport.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's all about people learning about the sport and learning that it's fun, exciting, and that they're welcome, Brad. And that leads me down this road of NASCAR's been in the news a lot lately and making some big changes and some big progress in areas that maybe should have come a long time ago, but that's not the point of the story. I go back to the Atlanta race. Bubba was very outspoken. NASCAR took it over. They did a moment of listening. Steve Phelps spoke. We saw things that we've never seen in our sport, an embracing of it. We saw kneeling for the anthem. We saw people speaking out about this. We see one black driver in our field in NASCAR. What did you think when you saw and heard that day and what NASCAR did and what Bubba said?
Well, let's go back to your previous question, and that's always the question I got from other sports people. In sports, you're an African American guy, you're an NBA All-Star. What are you doing at a NASCAR race? And I'd explain it, and in the end, we'd always get to, yeah, man, but what about those Confederate flags? I'm like, yeah, I don't like it. It makes my skin crawl. But my dad taught me to treat myself as if I'm equal. So I'm going to the racetrack. I don't care. I want to go and I've met more people that are great people. I've got more people in my life today that I met at the racetrack who are my best friends in the world, as opposed to some of that or the racism or whatever you're doing with whatever. I've got more of the good than I do bad. But last week I got a call, I believe it was last Wednesday, from Steve Phelps. And Steve said, Brad, it's been a long time coming. I just want you to know, at the end of the day, this is what we're going to do. We're going to banish the Confederate flag from all of our events. And the reason why he called me is because a lot of people don't realize this. This is about 20 years ago. I was living in Ormond Beach, Florida, and my neighbor was Brian. Brian France was my neighbor. And we used to hang out and knock around, and I used to spend a lot of weekends with his dad, Bill France Jr. We would go up and down the Halifax River on our little boat and hang out, and we became friends. And so I was sitting there, and it was the weekend before the Bristol race, and Brian came over because I was going to work out. I was off season for me, and he said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." So he comes in, we're sitting in my house, and we're chit-chatting about racing and taking racing, the marketing platforms from racing, and really overhauling them and trying to get racing into a position, NASCAR racing, where it could be more in tune with the big three sports. And he said, I'm trying to think through this, how I can do that. And what people don't realize is Brian France was brilliant when it comes to marketing. He knows the market, the marketing mediums better than any person I've ever been around. So we're chit-chatting. I said, Brian, in order to do this, you really need to take a hard look at diversity. You're going to have diversification efforts in order to be able to compete with the big three, because that's something they have, you don't have, you've never had. And this is going on 50, 60 years. You got to address this. He says, I know, but how do we do this? So I got a napkin out. And we started talking about what does it look like for NASCAR to be inclusive in the year 2000. And so from there, we started the diversity program on my couch. And it's grown and turned into this heck of a program. So to get back to your question, Steve called me and he said, I know the things that you've done behind the scenes in our sport. I want to say thank you. A lot of people don't realize that you've been at the head of our diversity efforts and you've always carried the banner. And he said, this is a big day for us. And I just want you to know that we're thinking about you. Jamie, it took my breath away. I was speechless. I didn't expect that. Didn't see it coming. I was so proud of what Daryl had done and said, and the direction and standing up and aiming for transforming inequality. I think that's a huge, huge undertaking. And I told Steve, I said, you're putting your neck out on the line, because at the end of the day, every business is really about green. It's not about black and white. And so you're taking a big chance. And he said, I'm willing to take this chance. And that's great leadership. And like I say, I've always got something to say, as you know. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say besides thank you. And we go on the next few days. I had a chance to do some things with CNN and do a couple other things and talk to some people. And it's been unbelievable, the response. And I've been so proud of all of these young men in our sport who stood up and taken a chance. Because you're taking a chance, Jamie, as a driver, to come out and to do anything but drive that race car. I've always said for 20 years, as a pro athlete, keep your mouth shut, do your job, don't offend people, bust your butt, and leave it alone. But I'm wrong in that. Today's platform, our professional athletes have the most influential voices in our world today. And you see what some of these young men are doing. Agree with them or not, but the efforts of someone like LeBron James, even if you look at what Colin Kaepernick has stood for over the last 6-7 years, whether you agree or not, he's taken on something that's bigger than he is. And a lot of these young athletes are doing this. And to see our athletes, see Ryan Blaney, to see Tyler Reddick, to see Ty Dillon, Dale Earnhardt Jr. has always been outspoken. But to see Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick and all of these guys stand up and say, hey, this has to change.
So, Brad, how proud were you just seeing all of the drivers come together, make that video talking about making change in our sport?
I'm so proud, Jamie, of all of our people in our sport. I think it's important. I think it's a transforming opportunity for the sport, not only for the sport, but for the world. And going forward, I'm a business owner in this sport, and one of the barriers has always been, as we're marching through the 21st century, is inclusion. We have to be inclusive if we're going to continue to grow our sport. That we've lost some steam over the last decade. We all know that, but I think this is a great opportunity to introduce some new people, some new fans, some new ideas to our sport, and get it going in a direction that could be unparalleled for the next 2 or 3 decades. I'm so excited, and like I say, who doesn't love race? Everyone loves race cars at 200 miles an hour. So this is a great opportunity for us to put a fresh start on a sport that has been around a long time, has a lot of history, has a lot of cultural identity, but I think it's a new era. And these young guys standing up and speaking for their sport and on behalf of their sport, I think it's transforming, like I've said before, and I'm really excited.
It's been interesting. Of course, some people are going to be upset. A lot of people are going to be excited. It's
Sure.
been interesting over the course of the last couple of weeks, hearing people talk about our sport. What's been the reaction for you, Brad, and things that you've heard?
Yeah, I think it's been the same. The people who've had or who are disappointed and aren't happy, I think they should feel free to voice their opinion. I got no problem. That's what living in America is all about. and I respect that. But I also think that as humans, the race of being humans, as opposed to color, we need to do what is right, do the things that are right in our society, and anything that represents oppression or intimidation or terror to some people, I don't care who you are and what segment of society, that's wrong. And so the feedback has been tremendously positive, and we have a lot of people who are thinking very progressively about how to treat one another and be respectful of one another and invite one another into being Americans and enjoying our country together. And I think we're seeing it, like I said earlier, in the capacity of our world is transforming. So I just think it's a great day, and it's amazing. It's taken something that happened, a little over a month ago or a month ago, to transform our entire world and wake people up and open some eyes and have people say, hey, whatever the circumstances, this is wrong and this has to stop. And so didn't think I would see this in my time, but I'm so honored and so proud to be a NASCAR person as well as being American. And I welcome any and all opinion as long as it's done with respect and decorum and communication. Man, I'll talk to you about anything you want to talk to me about, and I'll respect it and I'll digest it, and I'll give you my opinion as well. And as long as we can continue to have communication, we can talk about race in this country. It's something we have to do. We don't do it enough, and that's one of the larger problems. Is we're all scared to talk about it because we live in such a politically correct environment. We can't have honest discussions, and maybe that'll come from this.
And you being a team owner, you really do see all sides of it from the outside looking in, being inside of the sport. Brad, where do you think this is going to lead us? You mentioned the drive for diversity that maybe some people hadn't heard of before, but tell me about that. And will we see the next Brad Daugherty or Bubba Wallace, or even the girls that are part of this drive for diversity? Where do you think that's going to end up?
This what has just happened in today's environment is a tremendous shot in the arm for the Drive for Diversity, which has been an incredible program at bringing individuals of color as well as young women through and giving them an opportunity, a leg up on learning the sport of NASCAR in an environment that gives them it's on job training. And what happens when you get to the end of the Drive for Diversity? Once again, it's not black or white; it becomes green. And so a lot of those opportunities go by the wayside. But what I have seen, Jamie, is I see more and more faces of color. I see more and more female people on pit road, on pit teams, working as engineers. There's so many jobs in NASCAR and so many opportunities. We all look at the driver, and I understand that because that's what the TV focuses on. But having more young women on pit road, having more faces of color on pit road, on race teams in different capacities, that's what makes me proud. And that's there, and that continues to evolve. And I think it's going to become even a greater opportunity for those folks in various capacities throughout the sport. And I'd love to see another face of color in the ownership ranks. I'd love to see more women have the opportunity to come in and own a NASCAR team and run these businesses, because they're huge businesses. Yeah, the racing is incredible. I'm so fortunate. I get to go play racing. I love being around the racing. But my partners, Jody and Tagga Schechter and Gordon Smith, we run a very, very successful business through our race program, and it's a hard working marketing company, but we get after it, and there's a lot of opportunity there for people, and that's what the Drive for Diversity program supports, creating opportunity for those people who didn't have the cultural lineage to come through and be a part of racing. Now you have a platform to work for, and I think this day and era is going to create an opportunity for those people to maximize that potential.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard somebody from Richard Petty Motorsports say how many large companies have come forth since all this happened that want to be tied to Bubba. They love what he stands for. They love what he's about, and they want to be associated with our sport now. Are you maybe wondering or thinking that could impact you as a team owner eventually, maybe bringing in some new sponsors? I mean, it's no surprise we've lost a lot of the big sponsors that have been around, but maybe this helps sponsorship as well.
Without question, Jamie. I've sat in many a boardroom with Black African American CEOs, and spoken to them about our sport, and there was always hesitation, and they always wanted to know about their product, their company, the Confederate flag, how it all jives, and uh, it was always disappointing to me. But I think now we can have an open conversation and say, hey, this is where we're going. That's where we were. This is where we're at, and this is where we're going, man. This is a great business opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity for the sport as a whole, but particularly when you're talking about companies that have a lot of African Americans in leadership roles that want to continue to push their business products forward, out into America and drive revenue back to their companies. Now NASCAR is going to become that attractive platform again. I do believe, and I'm hoping we get back to the heydays of when the sport had a lot of Fortune 100 and 500 companies, really utilizing our platforms to get their product and their message out. I hope those days are on their way back.
Absolutely. We're more open and welcoming than ever before, I think, at this point. So it's going to be exciting to see where it all goes. Well, Brad, before I let you go, I want to get back to, the important stuff, being the team owner and highlights that you have had. And I can't help but think of one moment in particular with AJ Allmendinger. He went to Victory Lane in Atlanta. And every time I see him in Victory Lane, I think of that moment with you guys. Take me back to when you won that race at Watkins Glen and maybe other highlights of being a team owner.
Yeah, we had come so close at Watkins Glen in the Cup Series. We had Marcus Ambrose, who drove for us for a number of years, and just an incredible road racer. And we had Sonoma won with Ambrose, and on the last lap he cut the car off trying to save fuel, and it wouldn't restart. He was leading the race, and Jimmy Johnson ended up winning that race. We had so many shots at Watkins Glen with him, and just either had a crash or whatever. And so that day we're sitting there. And we're in the booth doing the pre-race show, and then we're doing, we're supporting throughout the race, me, Rusty, and Alan Bestwick and whatnot. And I'm sitting there, and AJ is doing a great job, and he is just toting the mail all day long, keeping the car clean. You get down into one at Watkins Glen, there's just, there's always a chance to wheel hop the car and bust the transmission. We hadn't done anything dumb. We get on that last lap. We got to race, who? We got to race Marcus Ambrose. And he's really, really hard to beat at a road course. And I was sitting there watching the thing, and they're coming up through the back chute there, coming up through the gears. And man, he is getting it. And Ambrose gets by him, and I'm like, oh, man, here we go. We're going to have a decent day, probably finish third or something like that. And Rusty is beating on my arm. He's like, you're going to win this thing. You're going to win this thing. I'm like, well, I hope so. It'd be great. So I'm trying not to watch because I jinx whenever I'm watching. I got my head down. I'm looking at some notes or something. We're coming out. We go down through the chicane, go through the bus stop. He and Ambrose are kind of banging fenders. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. Don't wreck the race car. He comes off that last corner, man, and he gets past Ambrose, and he is getting up through the gearbox, and we win. This is unbelievable. We win this thing. I lose my mind. I'm trying to keep my composure because I'm doing the race, and you always want to be really fair. And Rusty's jumping up and down. He's beating on me, and I'm like, I don't, I'm trying to get my composure, and he's like, you got to go to Victory Lane. So I run down to Victory Lane, and people are jumping around. I grab AJ, and I pick him up, and he's looking at me. He's like, Brad, what? He's like, put me down. Will you put me down? I'm a grown man. I look like a little kid. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I put him down. It was just a great day. And, my team, for smaller race teams to have that opportunity, it doesn't come very often. And great day for us, great day for our company. And we go on to Sonoma. We should have won that race. We should have won Martinsville with AJ. He did a great job for us. We've had a lot of opportunity. And we're trying to get back to that. We're trying to get back to those glory opportunities. And hopefully with Ricky Stenhouse and Ryan Priest, we're going to have our shot. We thought we had our shot at Daytona this year, sitting on the pole. Ran really well there. And then a couple weeks ago, Charlotte had a great race car, finished fourth. So we're coming. We're going to figure it out. But anytime you get close to winning, when you're a smaller team, boy, it makes it all worth it.
Absolutely. I love to see the passion still, Brad. It's so good to hear from you. You just have so many just diverse topics to cover. So I appreciate you, and we could talk for much longer.
Jamie, thank you so much. I enjoy watching you. You do a great job. You're the hardest working person on that pit road. You really, really bust your butt. And You've earned every opportunity through your hard work. Proud of you, and keep doing what you're doing, and we'll see you around.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for all that you're doing as well with the diversity program. It's doing amazing things, and you can see it come into life on pit road.
Thank you. Appreciate it.